Welcome back to Yehoshua's Daf Yomi Shiur, where the Daf continues until the appearance and the arrival of Mashiach ben David, Messiah the son of David, or as they say, Ad Bias Goel Tzedek, which means until the arrival, the coming of the righteous Redeemer. And today we will be studying Tractate Chullin, page 53a, top of the page. Tractate Masechtas Chullin, Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, top of the page, with the words Yesh Drusa Lechatul. Yesh Drusa Lechatul, Oy Ein Drusa Lechatul, Amale Af Lechulda, Yesh Drusa Lechulda, Oy Ein Drusa Lechulda, Amale Af Lechatul, Ein Drusa. Does a cat render an animal a treifa through clawing? Or does a cat not render it a treifa through clawing? Rav said to him, even a weasel, which is smaller than a cat, does render an animal a treifa through clawing. Rav Kahana also asked him, does a weasel render an animal a treifa through clawing, or does a weasel not render it a treifa through clawing? Rav said to him, even a cat does not render an animal a treifa through clawing. Lechatul ulechulda yesh lahem drusa, oy ein lahem drusa, amalech lechatul yesh drusa, lechulda ein drusa. Rav Kahana also asked him, with regard to a cat and a weasel, do they render an animal a treifa through clawing, or do they not render it a treifa through clawing? Rav said to him, a cat does render an animal a treifa through clawing, but a weasel does not render it a treifa through clawing. Lo kasha, v'lo kasha. Das ist nicht schwer, it's not a kasha. Ha diamale aflechul yesh terusa v'oivois. Ha diamale aflechatul in terusa be'emre rav rebe. Ha diamale lechatul yesh terusa. The Gemara clarifies that the apparent contradiction between these responses is not difficult. That which Rav said to him, even a weasel does render an animal a treifa through clawing, was stated about a case of clawed birds. That which he said to him, even a cat does not render an animal a treifa through clawing, was stated about a case of adult sheep. That which Rav said to him, a cat does render an animal a treifa through clawing, but a weasel does not render it a treifa through clawing, was stated about a case of kids and lambs. Boy Ravashi, Shar oifois tmein, yesh lem druso, or ein lehem druso. Amalei Rav Hillel Ravashi, Ki habinan bei Rav Kahana Amar. Amalei Rav Hillel Ravashi, Ki habinan bei Rav Kahana Amar. Shar oifois tmein yesh lem druso. The Mishnah states that a small bird clawed by a hawk is a treifa. Rav Ashi raises a dilemma with regard to other non-kosher birds beside a hawk. Do they render a bird a treifa through clawing, or do they not render the treifa through clawing? Rav Hillel said to Rav Ashi, when we were in this study, Rav Kahano, he said other non-kosher birds do render a bird a treifa through clawing. V'hanantinan drusas haneitz be'of hadak. Drus hasanetz bidich vatei, ve'inach bidezut ra minayhu, v'ikad yamri drus hasanetz bide rabi minay, ve'inach bidach batayhu. The Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah, or if it was clawed by a hawk, in the case of a small bird, it is a treifa, apparently. only a hawk renders a small bird a treifa through clawing. The Gemara responds, the Mishnah means that a small bird clawed by a hawk is rendered a treifa even in a case where it is as large as the hawk. But these other non-kosher birds can render a small bird a treifa only in a case where it is smaller than them. And there are those who say a small bird clawed by a hawk is rendered a treifa even in a case where it is larger than the hawk. But these other non-kosher birds can render a small bird a treifa only in a case where it is, at most, as large as them. Amar Rav Kahana Mishmei Rav Shimi bar Ashi Ein drusa lishual Eini Yoki Yosef Rav Dimi Amar Maaseh v'dois Shual rachel b'merchatz shel beis hini Uba Maaseh lefnei chachomim V'yomreru yesh druso Amar Rav Sabcha Ha'i chatul haba. Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav Shimi bar Ashi, a fox does not render an animal a treifa through clawing. The Gemara asks, is that so? But when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said there was an incident in which a fox clawed a ewe in the bathhouse of Beit Hine, and the incident came before the sages, and they said this is a case of clawing. Rav Safra said in response, in that case, the predator was a cat, not a fox. Ikadam Rav Kahana Mishmei Rav Shimi bar Ashi yesh drusa lishual Eini Yoki Yosef Rav Dimi Amar Maaseh v'dois Shual rachel b'merchatz shel beis hine Uba Maaseh lefnei chachomim v'yomru ein druso. Rav Sapra Ahu kelev have. Rav Yosef Naktina named drusa lekelev. There are those who say that the above exchange happened differently. Rav Kahana said in the name of Shimi bar Ashi, a fox does render an animal treifa through clawing. The Gemara asks, is that so? But when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said there was an incident in which a fox clawed a ewe in the bathhouse of Beit Hini, and the incident came before the sages, and they said, this is not a case of clawing. Rav Safra said in response, in that case the predator was a dog, not a fox. And Rav Yosef said, we have a tradition that a dog does not render an animal treifa through clawing. Amar Abaye Naktina named drusa ela biyad Le'apok yeredila Ein drusa el b'sipoirin Le'apok she'en dilo Ein drusa el b'das Le'apok shelo midas dilo Ein drusa el michaim Le'apok la'acham misa dilo. With regard to the definition of clawing that renders an animal a treifa, Abaye said, we have a tradition that clawing is only with the foreleg, to the exclusion of clawing with the hind leg, which does not render the animal a treifa. Additionally, clawing is only with the claw, to the exclusion of salvaging with the tooth, which does not render the animal a treifa, because the teeth contain no venom. Really? Claws have venom and teeth have no venom? Alright. And clawing is only through an intentional act to the exclusion of an unintentional act, which does not render the animal a treifa. For example, if the predator accidentally fell on the prey with its claws outstretched. And clawing is only while the predator is alive, to the exclusion of a case where it clawed an animal after death, which does not render the animal treifa. Okay? Amri hashte shelo vidas Amri amatla liachamis miboy The sages say, now that you said that an unintentional act of clawing does not render an animal treifa, is it necessary to say that clawing after death is ineffective? The Gemara responds, no. It is necessary to teach this halacha for a case where the predator clawed while it was still alive, and they cut off his hand. They cut off his hand with his claws inside the prey's flesh. Lest you say it injects its venom while it claws, Abaye teaches us that it injects its venom while it withdraws its claws. Accordingly, where the venom has yet to be injected before death, meaning before its hand is severed, the animal is kosher. Amar Rabba bar Avuna Amar Rav Arish nichnas lebein hashforim v'nim tzipporim begabe shel echad mehen ein choishishin shemari drasoy mai taime roiv aroyos dorsin umiuton ein dorsin v'chol hadoires ein tziporno nishmetes v'zois hoil v'tziporno nisheves lo begabo ema bekoiso nischachech. Rabba bar Avuna says, the Rav says, if a lion entered among the oxen, and afterward a claw was found stuck in the back of one of the oxen, one need not be concerned that perhaps the lion clawed it. What is the reason for this? Even though a majority of lions claw their prey, and only a minority of them do not claw, still, it is known with regard to any lion that claws that its claw is not ripped out in the process. And therefore, with regard to this ox, since a claw sits in its back, say that it rubbed against a wall that had a claw embedded in it. המשחק אין ציפורים יושבס לא בגבוי וזה הוי וציפורים יושבס לא בגבוי עם הארי דרס. The Gemara objects, on the contrary, say that even though a majority of oxen rub against the wall and only a minority do not rub, still it is known with regard to any ox that rubs that a claw does not sit in its back. Therefore, with regard to this ox, since a claw sits in its back, say the lion clawed it. The Gemara responds, one can say this, one can say that. Therefore, establish the matter according to its presumptive status, in which case the ox is not a treifa. Accordingly, the ox is permitted, because this case is one of uncertainty as to whether the animal is clawed. And Rav conforms to his standard line of reasoning, as he says, one need not be concerned in a case of uncertainty as to whether an animal is clawed. אבל מוגם ציפוירן חוישים וציפוירן נמי לא אמורן אלא לכו אבל יבשו עבדה דמשתם. Abaye said, we said that one need not be concerned that the lion clawed the ox only when the claw was found in its back, since it is known that a claw is not ripped out during clawing. Okay, I lost the place here. During clawing. But if only the spot of a claw was found, meaning a perforation, one must be concerned. And even if the claw was found in its back, we say that one need not be concerned only when it was moist, since this indicates it well connected to the flesh. Accordingly, if the lion had clawed the ox, this claw would not have been ripped out. But if the claw was dry, one must be concerned because it happens that such a claw is ripped out during clawing. And with regard to a moist claw as well, we said that one need not be concerned only when one claw was found in its back, but if there were 2 or 3 claws embedded in its back, we must be concerned because multiple claws were not likely to be embedded in the wall. And this is the halacha, only where they are situated in a row as they are in the paw of a lion. Itmar Rav Omar in Choshishin L'Savik Derusa, Shmuel Amar Choshishin L'Savik Derusa, it was stated, Rav says, one need not be concerned in a case of uncertainty as to whether an animal was clawed, and Shmuel says, one must be concerned in a case of uncertainty as to whether an animal was clawed, and the animal must be inspected. Safek loal. Ema loal. Safek kalba. Safek shudra. Ema kalba. Al. Shatek. Yate benayu. Ema shalom shabi. Ketaresha dechabinayu. Nach miris. Hey. Ihu ka meabe. V'inhu kam karkaran. The Gemara explains, everyone agrees that in a case where it is uncertain whether a predator entered the pen or coop, and uncertain whether it did not enter, I will say that it did not enter. Furthermore, if it is known that an animal entered but is uncertain whether it was a dog or uncertain whether it was a cat, I will say that it was a dog, which cannot render an animal a treifa through clawing. And even if a predator entered but it was quiet and sat among the animals, I will say it made peace with them as though it were tame and did not claw them. And if it decapitated one of them, I will say that his anger subsided afterwards and it did not claw other animals. And if it was roaring and they were clucking, I will say that they are only frightening each other, and one need not be concerned. Okay, we turn on to page 53. Let's continue to end this idea. Ahadad, you keep, top of 53b. Ahadad, you keep li'ihu, yishasivinu kam karkaran, marsar masiko avid behu, marsavar machmas, be'utisei ha, who dekavdan. I will say they're only frightening each other, on top of 53b, and one need not be concerned. They disagree only when the lion is quiet and the birds are clucking. One sage, Shmuel, holds they are clucking because it is acting upon them, meaning clawing them. And one sage, Rav, holds that they are doing this out of fear of the predator, but it is not necessarily clawing them. Okay, we'll stop here.